I'm starting the recording now, and after the webinar, we shall all send you a link so that you can also forward that to any of your colleagues in case the webinar could be relevant for them. I have a few household things, and that is I would like to ask everybody who joined to put themselves on mute if you don't have anything to say. It's very simple. You just click on the green microphone on top of your screen. It keeps the webinar a little more manageable and also saves a bit of bandwidth. My other question is that if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. And then I will make sure that we find time to get your question addressed. That is easier than everybody trying to speak at the same time. Okay, the chat box is at the lower end of your dashboard. I see we have a very good number of attendees now. I'm counting 28. We had around 40 registrants. But it's not unusual that people in the end get caught up by other priorities. But I'm really happy to see so many people here. The program that we have for you today is we shall have a general introduction by Graham McCann of IOP Publishing. Graham was the project lead during 2017 of Project TAPAS and made a proposal to the STM board. After that, we have 3 people representing platform providers. We have Christos Nikolakakos from Atipon, we have John Sack from Highwire, and we have Andy Hurt from IEEE Explore. And they will give their views and have some questions for discussion about TAPAS. After that, the discussion is completely open to everybody who joined. I can imagine that you may have questions. From my side, I would also be curious to hear what your own plans are concerning TAPAS. And I would already like to announce that tomorrow, after the webinar, we shall be sending out a survey to you, and we hope to get some response back from you to hear what you plan to do with the TAPAS proposal. Because at this moment it is a little bit unclear who of the STM members would be eager to implement, and also who of the STM members would be willing to dedicate resources to further prototyping and a bit more user testing. So while the number of joiners, of participants to our webinar has already increased to over 30, which is a very good sign, I think that is also a good moment to hand over to Graham. And Graham, can you please explain the whole TAPAS proposal for us? Over
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Efka?
Very well.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Graham McCann from IOP Publishing, and the presentation I'm going to give is jointly with Andrew Hurd. Andrew was leading up the technical working group that we had in last year working up this TAPAS proposal. So the work that we did last year was to think through different scenarios from a strategic business operations point of view and also from a technical point of view, and put a proposal to the board of STM about how we should take the project forward. Now, at its simplest, as a way of introduction, TAPAS is a toll-free link for authors to let authors get access to a version of the article, and I'll put that in context through my slides. TAPAS, some publishers have toll-free author linking already. What TAPAS is it's an industry-wide initiative to ensure that researchers have a similar experience no matter which publishers they go to, and through that awareness to build recognition and trust with the system that publishers put in place. So the problem that TAPAS set out to address is the two different directions that are shown in this slide. On one hand, our researchers want free and easy access to content and to be able to share that easily with their colleagues and co-workers. And this has given rise to things like ResearchGate and the sharing on there, and Sci-Hub, and various other ways that researchers share content. And that's directly opposed to the business model that many publishers rely on for their revenue, which is to restrict access to value-added content. So TAPAS needs to sit somewhere in the middle of those two different positions. And the proposals that we've put ahead, I think in general, move publishers to being more liberal with sharing. And that's something that got quite a bit of discussion at the STM board. So the reason that we need TAPAS is that I think publishers are increasingly finding themselves less relevant as the source of research content. That content can now be found widely elsewhere. And where that discovery and reading is happening off of publisher websites, it's largely invisible to us. We can't count usage, we don't know what's happening to that version, and so we're not relevant anymore once the content's left our platforms. And to meet the expectations of our researchers, we still need to allow this easy and wide access to content while we keep our commercial models. And publishers who've put in this sort of toll-free linking have found that the majority of people who are accessing illegally hosted PDFs already have subscriber access to the content. And we would like opportunities to engage with those legitimate users who are accessing content that's hosted illegally elsewhere. And TAPAS should set out to address all those things. Oops. So we've started our thinking very much in how this would benefit researchers, and we want them to have the confidence that they can share research articles with anyone at any time. That's the behaviour that many people are using with PDF versions of records. They're sharing it without worrying. So if when sharing is happening by a toll-free link, then we need researchers to have the confidence that they can share that with anyone. One key aspect of the TAPAS proposal is that when somebody's following that link, they will always get access to the best version that they are entitled to as a user. And an example of that would be if they're a subscriber, if their institution's a subscriber to that content, they should get access to the version of record as they would as if they were coming to the publisher website. And technically there are some challenges around that, but this is the matter of principle, that anybody following the link will get access to the best version they're entitled to. And those links can be posted anywhere and reused in any way. And what publishers get in return for that is a sharing infrastructure and a sharing culture that is under the management of publishers themselves. We will know what's going on, we can see what the sharing is like, and we can monitor that. And it means that having a sharing approach that we approve and that we feel we can manage means that we can be more comfortable in supporting large-scale aggregation of links and third-party services, because those links ultimately will bring subscribers back to content on publisher websites. And the sharing of links should help make the sharing of PDFs of the version of record less attractive, because we'll have provided a viable alternative to just sharing the PDF. So after a lot of thinking, we came up with these three key elements of TAPAS. One is a promise to researchers that describes what the service will deliver. And you can read that as almost like a marketing statement or a mission statement. We also have a set of minimum requirements that a publisher will have to meet to participate in the TAPAS initiative. And then the third element is an open market to allow service providers to offer commercial services to publishers that deliver the promise and the minimum requirements. So those are the three key elements that we've been considering in implementing TAPAS. And I'm going to go through the three of those in detail. So the TAPAS promise is required to build trust and adoption with researchers. And the promise there is that TAPAS gives everyone access to the version of the article, to a version of the article, made available for by the publisher. And for subscribers, this will be the version of record. And for non-subscribers, it's up to the publisher what that might be. So for IOP, if we were implementing this, it would be the author accepted manuscripts, so the green open access version. And for other publishers, they might wish to offer a version of record of some description. So that part is entirely down to the publisher. But what the publisher commits to is anyone following a link will get access to some version of the full text. So for publishers to participate, there are a couple of sets of minimum requirements. The first is on the usage of links. We don't want to see any restrictions placed on where users can post TAPAS links and how TAPAS links could be reused. And the reason for that is that if there are limitations, then TAPAS simply won't be successful and people will continue to share by PDF as they have been doing up till now. We also think it's important that there are no barriers between clicking on a link and getting to the content. And the sorts of things that have come up in the discussion is perhaps surveys or registration layers, and any barriers to taking people to the content after they've clicked on a link will mean that TAPAS isn't as effective in replacing the sharing of PDFs. And as a minimum, publishers will need to provide TAPAS links to authors. So authors that are publishing with a journal will be given a TAPAS link so they can share their article widely on social media and with colleagues. And that is the sort of minimum. That is the minimum that we would ask that publishers support. However, it would be great if publishers felt able to support allowing any subscribers on their platforms to create TAPAS links using a widget, and Andy will talk a little later about the widget. And the difference here being really one of scale of who has access to TAPAS links, but also one of concern from some members of STM that they don't want large-scale generation of links in the way that might happen if this functionality was available on platforms. So as an initial step, many publishers would only want to provide links for authors. So when a researcher is following a link, there are some minimum requirements for what the access will look like for non-subscribers. So they must be shown a full text version of the article that can be protected by viewer technologies. And the sharing versions could be the three things listed there: an accepted manuscript, the version of record or a preprint, or a specific version prepared for sharing. And that needs to be available the day that the DOI is available. And the policy impact of this is that the content could be viewed during any green open access embargo period. So for many publishers of subscription content, this would be a policy change saying we will allow people to see full text if they're not a subscriber, whilst the content is still under green open access embargo. But because they're following a TAPAS sharing link, we will make that possible. So that's the second set of minimum requirements for publishers to participate. And the reason for the second stipulation is that there's not much point in having a sharing link that says come back in 12 months when the content is available. To be successful to reduce the amount of sharing by PDF, those links will have to work from the day that the DOI is available and the day that the authors get the sharing link. Oh, and I've just covered that slide, so I'll whip over that. It will be up to publishers about who can create a sharing link. So as I said, the authors are a minimum requirement. There were lots of other ideas when we were discussing this. Readers with access rights might be able to create a sharing link. Referees could perhaps be given or create sharing links. Funders, journalists, and editors. So there's actually quite a wide list of use cases for sharing links that go beyond authors, and that would be up to individual publishers. Andy, can I hand over to you now for the technical side of what we discussed?
Sure, Graham. Should we just continue on with your slides here?
I can tap next for you.
Yes, thank you. So the technical approach we took actually took quite an arc in terms of the complexity of rising to a peak of trying to codify a lot of the rules of within TAPAS, and then pulling back to where we settled was something that was very light and made use of existing infrastructure to allow for both flexibility and the simple, easy to understand protocols for implementing TAPAS. So the proposal makes abundant use of the Crossroads, the DOI Global Handle Registry. And the publishers would have their own metrics and analytical platforms to measure the use of links and how much this is adopted. Much of the work of implementing is not something that's done centrally, but it's implementing this on the publisher platform. And we can talk about what it would take for publishers to do that after the slides are done. The centralized infrastructure, as I said, is limited just to the development of a branded widget, and the widget would have both branding elements and establishing standards for implementation, and then the standard link format, which I'll talk about. The different publishers, as Graham said, different publishers may have different policies subject to the minimum set of TAPAS standards, but this approach gives publishers the latitude to implement TAPAS according to their own specific policies. That is, who do they offer the ability to create links to, and what articles or what versions of articles would be under the TAPAS link sharing umbrella. So the other thing that this approach does is to allow for the creation of a marketplace for TAPAS services. So we did not issue an RFP. We created a an RFI just to poll vendors in the market as to their interest in creating solutions that would offer TAPAS services to publishers. And we got we received some good responses to that, which a later slide will show. So so the branded widget, as you can see here, is I'm showing the Explore platform. This is entirely illustrative. So there would be on the platform potentially an offer to this person who has access, is a subscriber, who has access to this article, to click on this widget. And if you go to the next slide, and clicking on that widget would give them a link that they can then freely share however they wish. And that would be the link that they can email, they can place on sharing sites wherever they would like. And if you notice that this is just the DOI, the standard DOI link with a parameter at the end, which is a unique key to the unique to this request for a link. So if you go to the next one, I show here the format, which is just, you have the first part, which is the full URI of a DOI for an article, and then it's tagged at the end, and we use TAPAS, that's a placeholder name, whatever we brand this as ultimately could be the key, or we could just call it what it is, a sharing code or something. And then the unique key parameter is unique both to the article and to the request that has been made to share that link. So that's tied back to the subscriber who created it. If we go to the the parameters that are added to the DOI already are passed through to the publisher platform. So this isn't creating any new functionality. It's only passing through something that we're creating. And then publishers then would have to validate that the key, meaning that the key it's a valid TAPAS link. And then based on the entitlements for the person following that link, if they're a subscriber, the key becomes superfluous. They would just get access to the article as if they were going to the publisher platform. But for non-subscribers, they would be offered a full text version of the article that the publisher has chosen to make available for sharing links. And that may be the also accepted manuscript, or it could be any other version that at a minimum is a full, but it still is the full text version of the article. So as you go to this next, if you go back again, Grandma, just to describe this quickly, is that if you follow the link, the subscriber is, oh, I did describe this, you're right. The only thing I want to point out is that as I was looking at these slides, and I haven't looked at them in months, the yes and no are flipped on the whether if it's a valid key. If it's a valid key, you would go to the TAPAS link endpoint up there. If they're a subscriber, it doesn't matter that they have a TAPAS, that this is a TAPAS link. You should just bring them to the publisher landing page and present the full text version that they are entitled to as a subscriber. But not a subscriber, you would take them to whatever the TAPAS link endpoint is and offer the version of the article that they should see, and flip those yeses and nos to get the logic right there. So going to the next slide, we received, as I mentioned, we've received positive responses from a number of service providers as to their interest in offering these services, some of whom I think might be on this call. And then if we go to the next one, some of the risks and concerns. I think it's, you go into this with eyes wide open. You could, we recognize that there are opportunities for trying to gain the TAPAS linked idea. So by creating links robotically, or so monitoring that will be an important factor in post-implementation. And then harvesting of links. And so there, while we don't, we want the one of the key principles is that these links should endure. There is the ability to deprecate a link based on any perceived abuses, and so spelling out what those abuses are as a condition of the creation and use of those links. So if we find that someone is harvesting links and creating a virtual library of links without having legitimately been the recipient of a shared link, those would be conditions, I think, that we could deprecate a link. And then there are other concerns in terms of extending TAPAS beyond the STM publisher community, just to make it a standard for link sharing in general. And the last bit here, just making sure that it meets the needs of researchers, and ensure that we're providing a good user experience that replaces the existing means of sharing that happens today. So if we could offer something which is acceptable beyond the emailing of a PDF, then we've made some headway. And the
Great.
next slide, I think that's it. Yeah.
That's it. There's no more slides. Yeah, thanks, Andy. Efka, can we pass the baton back to you?
Of course, thank you. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Andy. This was all very clear. Before we jump into the discussion, maybe I can throw a question at you that people raised with me during the past few weeks whenever I mentioned TAPAS, and that is the very simple question: if you do TAPAS, you effectively do green open access without embargo. Is that true?
No. It's a partial green open access. So the way I would describe it is that you've given permission to a group of researchers, for example, authors, to share access to their own particular article. And the people who find that link are then able to get access to a green open access version, for example, during the embargo period. So the links would have to be aggregated and systematically made available before you could call that green open access. Okay. Because for it to be a true green open access, there would have to be some way of making those links discoverable and available in a systematic way. Okay. I think of green open access as going to, for example, a publisher platform and seeing the article there that anybody can take. But the barrier is that people would have to have a link to follow.
Okay, so it's the selectivity for the users who can create these links that makes it different from completely green open access.
Correct. Now, there was quite a bit of concern with the STM board about large-scale harvesting and aggregation of links, and if that is a problem in the future, then we press the nuclear button and just remove the TAPAS functionality and say it's been abused and it's not been successful. I think the publishers who have implemented toll-free linking have found very low levels of abuse and found that most of the people following links were already subscribers. So I think at the moment there isn't really any evidence of that happening, but it doesn't take a great leap to imagine it being the case.
Okay. Well, that's a very clear answer. Thank you very much. And I would then now like to switch to the second part of our webinar. And I've invited Christos Nikolakakos from Atipon and John Sack from Highwire to give us their comments and questions. Christos, I saw you're on the webinar and I see you've unmuted yourself. Could you give us your open reaction to what you've heard?
Yes, thank you, Fka. And I'll start from the very last point that was made on the very last slide, which is shaping it in a different way. It's that this initiative, as in most of the things that we actually do that are targeting end users, researchers in this case, you would have acceptance of that solution in a way from the publishers, but you would really have approval from the end users. If they actually find that as an experience and as a way to fulfill their requirements in the researcher workflow, that's something that would allow them to uptake that solution and move forward and move away from traditionally using content or sharing content via Sci-Hub, for example, or ResearchGate. On the other hand, going through the even the business case and the RFI and looking at the points that were mentioned today also in the presentation, it seems to me that certain points are a little bit conflicting, and because they're open to interpretation or open to implementation and adoption by the publishers also, it leaves some room to remove the confidence of the users investing and using a solution like TAPAS. For example, there were at some point mentions around the promise to the users that they would have a consistent access to the content via a TAPAS link that would be always there. Then on the other hand, if there was an abuse, then we could automatically remove the TAPAS links from existence, in which case a user that is relying on accessing content, a version of the content available, will automatically lose access to that content. So if you remove the trust to a user that they have what they need whenever they need it, it's most likely that they're either not going to adopt that, or most likely they're simply going to fall back to the traditional ways of sharing and getting content, simply because not just it's easy to get it, but it's also always available. That's one of the points. Then there was also a mention about having a seamless experience and seamless way to access and reuse the content through sharing. There was mention about selectivity and green open access and how you would actually even be able to use and share content on ResearchGate through TAPAS links that would be made available. That to me looks like, if you look at it from a publisher perspective, what's really important is to be able to attract users back to their sites, either that is for counter purposes or for further engagement, as we're referring to. But the question is, what is really engagement from a user perspective? Because we need to understand, why do users really want to get the PDF, and why would users really want to download the PDF? So even if you offer them an alternative via sharing link to the TAPAS, to a version of the record or another version of the content that you will make available, is that really what they want? For example, if people collaborate on a document, and some of them use a sharing link to get access to an accepted manuscript, and some other people that are actually sharing that content have access to the version of record, how would example services like annotations on the same content would be made available? And how would other ways of using the content and collaborating would be made available on these different versions that the users actually engage with? Then would it mean that maybe if you open and enable the let's say sharing via TAPAS, then you create a community of users that are perfectly comfortable with using not the version of record but another version that the publisher provides, and in that case you create a community engaged around that content and not so much around the version of record that you actually want to sell and you have behind paywalls? Would that be an initiative that would actually work against sharing, TAPAS sharing per se? So I think there are a lot of things to consider around how would that solution be viable. I mean, and I think the main let's say question from my perspective to answer and have in mind when we go down a path around sharing is how can publishers make value or add value to the version of record beyond just being a document that you can download and share and read with other users. So it's about more about adding value to the version of record, so that even if you share an alternative, people still have a reason and an incentive and a motivation to seek the version of record and get that through the legitimate channels, even if you do share an alternative. Which means that yes, sharing is perfectly acceptable, and I think it will work. It would, in a way, address problems that we're facing now, but it wouldn't completely eliminate them unless we figure out exactly why people are actually involved and engaged with the version of record, how they want to interact with it, and how do publishers actually create that value on top of their content, so that they focus on maybe creating the right services to offer to researchers to engage with their content rather than just simply providing the content itself.
Okay, thank you, Christos. If I can summarize your comment and try to do that in one sentence, then it's more or less, why would the users switch to this if they can already share in such an easy way? And in the context of publishers' platforms, what kind of real added value should be there to attract the users?
Exactly.
Graham, Andy, would you like to comment on this now, or would you prefer that we first turn to John, who also has a few questions, I know?
If you don't mind, Efka, I think I should answer them now, because if there's I'd like to answer them now, because otherwise they're going to start mounting up and I'll get confused. So I've written down Christoph's questions, and I can actually go through them one at a time. The first question was about conflicting points in the implementation. On one hand, we promise that TAPAS links will always be available, and on the other, we threaten to remove them if there's abuse. And I think we were imagining there some very, very specific abuse scenarios where there have been hundreds of thousands of downloads of versions coming through a link. It would probably be more like systematic crawling abuse than human abuse. So I think there had to be some safeguards there to reassure publishers about the whole infrastructure. So I'm not seeing this as something that would be a routine. Thing. You talked about the sort of seamlessness and of experience and annotations and how those sorts of things would work around about sharing. And so for sharing, there's a separate initiative from STM around about the voluntary principles of sharing. And in mixed groups of people who are subscribers and non-subscribers, if they're going through some sharing service like Mendeley, then within those groups, publishers have already said that sharing the version of record's not a problem in that scenario for research purposes and people collaborating. I think TAPAS use case is much more about discovery and sharing to a wide group, and about discovery rather than about collaboration. And I agree with you. I don't think TAPAS links would be the best way to collaborate, and I wouldn't really expect that to be a scenario that would be successful. Getting the community around the version of record, getting the community working in a version that wasn't the version of record, focusing on, say, an accepted manuscript and diluting the the quality of what the community is looking at. I think that's inherent in green open access, and it depends what you mean by community. As I said, most of the experience is that the people following sharing links are already subscribers, and they're going to still get to the version of record. And people who aren't subscribers would get access potentially to the different version. So I don't really see that the focus would shift from the version of record to the green open access version potentially. And then your last point is the much more difficult one about how we can add value beyond the PDF. So I'll speak from a IFP publishing point of view. We've invested a lot of money and thought and time in making HTML and much more enhanced articles available and adding differentiators onto the business. And those are reasonably popular, but they certainly haven't made a step change, I think, in the perception of value that publishers add. Within people who are advocates and know, they're appreciative of what's happening, but for the large bulk group of people, I think they're still at the moment focused around PDF. But I don't disagree with you. We need to find ways of adding value beyond sharing a PDF.
Thank you. Andy,
do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you said much of it. The only other thing I would say is that the deprecating of a link would be a very rare action, and there are other ways of mitigating that I think should also be on the table in terms of monitoring and thwarting any robotic or harvesting activity.
I heard one other question underneath Christos's comments, and that is if sharing is already so easy in the current ways, yes, what would make users switch to TAPAS functionality?
That's a difficult question to answer. I think two things. The first being that it's endorsed by publishers and offered by publishers as a legitimate way to share. And the promise and that we make for always to work is one thing. That would be the main benefit for researchers. The second part would be that we don't really expect this to completely stop article sharing. I think that's very, very unlikely. I think this would be helping to address the balance, and if it goes very well, then and it takes off as a cultural thing with researchers, then perhaps it could do that. But at the moment, we were definitely seeing it as a mixed economy.
I would say just a small comment on that, and then I won't interrupt, take any more of your time. If I think we can find ways to add value to the version of record, so that it makes much more sense to engage with the publisher and engage with the content provided by the publisher, even if you do have a sharing link to a plain, let's say, text document that is a PDF in a way, then I think you would be able to address both cases or both problems that you're facing. Yes, from one perspective, publishers would still be able to count usage by bringing and using share TAPAS links back to their sites, and then on the other hand, the researchers would have a reason to go to the publishers because of that added value, instead of just using a plain PDF that is simply a representation of the text.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I'm still waiting to hear what the extra added value that we haven't thought of is.
Okay, I would like to move on also with an eye on the time, and I'll be handing over to John Sack of Highwire. But before I do that, I wanted to say to everybody on this webinar, if you have questions yourself, please put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we spend some time on that too. But now first to John from Highwire. John, are you there? Are the dogs also quiet and obeyed?
I think the dogs have gone back to sleep. It's only 7:15 in the morning out here. Thanks for the presentation. It really gave me answers to several of my questions. I want to go back to one particular point that Christos made and just underscore it. this has to work in the user's workflow for it to be really adopted by the end users. And the place I'd say I didn't hear how it would work is the ability to save something. So lots of people at Stanford are thoroughly invested in saving things in Mendeley. How could that be done? Or given 3 or 4 other reference managers, how would they save the result of retrieving a TAPAS link? So that's, I think, a critical question to make sure it works for people. Second question has to do, you know, we often think about network scale kinds of things, and the one that comes to mind in this one is, what level of adoption would be needed for success? Does it, if 2 publishers implement this and their users love it, is that good enough for those publishers to say, yeah, this works for me? Or is it something that somehow we have to scale like Chorus or like Crossref to a very large amount? So that's a question. The third question is, if this is really intended as a response to ResearchGate, do we have any interaction with ResearchGate on this that says, yes, they would improve their instructions to authors, they would tell authors how to get TAPAS links, any intervention that they would do to improve adoption in their platform? And then I had some technical questions, comments. Has anyone had any interaction with Counter on this to know whether when we count things for Counter, and I know this is a little bit of a strange question given that Counter is supposedly for subscriber usage counting, but I suspect most platforms use Counter rules to count downloads. Could we count these as views, as downloads, and reporting the number of times an article has been viewed? So that's one technical question. Second, question about the model that you showed was based around the DOI. I don't understand why the DOI is the place to hang this on. Eventually, it has to get to a platform. So I'm just curious. Is that intended to make it so that the link is persistent, and that if the document moves from one platform to another, the link would still work? Is that the main reason for hanging off the DOI? And those are my questions and comments. I've got more, but in interest of time, I'll stop now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, John. These are all very good questions. Graham or Andy, would you like to give it a go?
Andy, do you want to give this one a go? If not, I can.
Yeah, I can take the last one first, which is you hit it on the nail on the head there. The DOI is a convenient and already established infrastructure, and it provides a persistent link back to the article, and also provides a way of passing through. Even if the link is invalid, you can still end up at the publisher endpoint and have the typical treatment of anyone trying to get to an article, whether or not they're a subscriber.
Okay. Then the other questions. Is that more for you, Graham? The user workflow, yeah, sure. The network scale, all of that? Yeah.
I'll go in reverse order since we started at the end. So the Counter, as John said, is very much geared towards subscribers. But so there's 2 scenarios. If you, as a user, if you follow a link and you end up on the publisher platform with the version of record, that's already counted. If you end up with a third-party service provider looking at a different version, then the service provider or platform we would expect to provide counter compliance statistics for that. They would be reported to the publisher. In terms of working with Counter and ResearchGate, we haven't had those extended discussions. This wasn't specifically a ResearchGate initiative, but we would hope that organisations would be willing to take links and post them, but we haven't specifically pursued that. What level of adoption would be needed for success? I don't have a clear answer for that. I mean, at the moment, a couple of large publishers have already got toll-free link sharing, and they feel it's worthwhile doing it individually. And I think it would be it's a bit of a branding issue, really, if we decide to have some sort of visual branding for TAPAS or a trademark for it that really makes that promise clear. Then let's say that 50% of publishers that a user would visit would be offering TAPAS links. I just don't know. But it certainly should need to be more than a couple of publishers. The sort of the vision of the project team is that this would be almost a ubiquitous service based around the DOI. And I completely agree this has to work in the user workflow. The scenario that you gave about saving, if you're a subscriber, you would get access to the version of record as normal. And you can save that the way that you normally would. If you're not a subscriber and you're getting access to an alternative version, it's really up to the publisher what that access looks like. For IOP, if we were doing it, we would want that to be the accepted manuscript to be available in a DRM viewer, so it couldn't be downloaded, and so we wouldn't want people to take that and then share it during a green open access embargo period, so that they wouldn't be able to share that. And I guess in that sense, it doesn't meet that particular workflow that you were thinking about, and that's the trade-off for getting the free access in my mind.
There's a question coming in on exactly that point, Graham, about offering an accepted manuscript or another simpler version than the version of record. The person posing the question in the chat box says a lot of publishers don't have those other versions available for delivery, or they may not even be hosting them. What kind of solution would there be for them?
What I've discussed in the past is having a much simpler view of the content as an HTML only view if they have an XML workflow. So you might have a very simple presentation that has some of the value removed, like the hyperlinking, all the things that publishers do to add value to those versions. So it could be a very basic version. That I think is more challenging if they don't have accepted manuscripts. Okay,
that's clear too. I think this leaves us a little more than 5 minutes to invite questions to the floor from anybody in the audience. I saw one question in the chat session, which we've just dealt with. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to pose a question? Please just unmute yourself, and then it will be clear on my dashboard that you'd like to pose a question. If there's not an immediate question, then I myself, out of curiosity, would like to encourage any of the bigger publishers on this call to say how eager they are towards TAPAS implementation. Because as Graham just said, you only need a few large ones to get the brand into the market. Is there anybody here from Elsevier or Springer or Wiley or Taylor and Francis who'd like to say something on that? I see Steve Watson. Steve, I know you're from Elsevier. Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Evka.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Yeah. So our position on TAPAS, we've been following it very interestedly, and we support the aims of TAPAS to improve the author sharing use case, specifically ensuring that non-subscribers get full text access to the links that the FAD shared with them. Now, Elsevier already has an author sharing solution, and it's working pretty well. We don't want to take part in TAPAS now, but we're watching it, and we may join later or extend our own solution with more TAPAS-like features. And I think we'd like to make it clear that we see some concern that we don't want TAPAS to be seen as a replacement for subscriber access. So a seamless authentication solution for subscribers is still an urgent industry need that we feel needs to be addressed. So yeah, we don't think it should replace that problem.
Okay. And in what sense does TAPAS differ from your own sharing solution?
Well, our sharing solution it's focused just on authors, so that matches the minimum requirements of TAPAS. But we allow a link which enables access to the version of record. It actually has a download option there, so you can get the PDF, but it is time limited to 50 days. But that gets used a lot and generates a lot of sharing.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, this last question just came in on the chat as well. The differences between current sharing strategies for the larger publishers. Is there another large publisher in the webinar who'd like to speak out what their position is?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Vanat from Wiley.
Oh, hello, Vanat. Yes, good to
Hi,
hear
I'm one
you.
of the product managers. I actually have a question how this is going to be different from other full text sharing, content sharing that publishers are offering. Because Wiley is actually offering content sharing right now for authors, for subscribers, and also for media partners.
Okay. Well, maybe we can post a question back to you. What would make TAPAS different from what you're doing now?
I didn't see the difference. The only difference is that there was this DOI, I guess, sharing, link sharing or integration. Whereas right now, the link is generated right into our platform. We're using ReadCube as a solution for that. But we also have a separate site that is presented to authors. They can go and request the links for their articles, and users who have access are taken to full text. If they don't have access, they are taken to restricted view ePDF. The only difference is that they cannot download and they cannot further share this article. But they can share that link that was shared with them.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we have somebody from ReadCube in the webinar as well. I think it's Paula Del Campo. Is that correct? Paula, are you still here?
I'm also here. This is Rob McGrath and hi, Banat. I can briefly speak that the solutions are remarkably similar, and you mentioned not the main difference, which is that we're generating the linking right now for end users. It goes directly to the Well platform, but in TAPAS it would go through Crossref, and that would be a relatively simple change as soon as that infrastructure is in place. So otherwise, all the rest of the mechanics are already aligned with everything we've been discussing.
Okay, and you're from ReadCube, did you say that?
Yes. Yeah, Rob McGrath.
Yeah, okay, and that's the way ReadCube would solve it. So then I have a very simple question. Any publisher here wanting to implement it, could they simply turn to you and could you make it happen for them?
We'd be happy to have a discussion, of course. Yeah, the technical infrastructure is quite similar already to the technical bits proposed in this discussion. And the main difference would be working with Crossref to do the initial link resolution.
Okay. I know that we also have other vendors who were interested in TAPAS services. We have Bill Park. Bill? would you like to add anything on that? Could Deep Dive offer something similar?
Hello, everybody. Yes, so we have a DRM viewer as well, which restricts access, and we have a private label version of that that could be deployed on a publisher platform fairly easily, and it would allow the publisher to define the types of controls they wish to place in terms of which article or version of article they wish to display, how long they wish to display it, and a number of other variables that are configurable for them. And we work with quite a number of publishers already, and so the content is already in place and readily available in this type of DRM controlled environment. And so it would be, particularly for those publishers, pretty easy to then basically apply the DRM viewer directly onto their site without having to do a lot of reintegration of content. And for new publishers, it's also fairly straightforward to get started.
Yeah. Let me then turn back to Graham and Andy. Would that be a proper implementation to TAPAS, or would you see that as not the way for your project to go? Please be fair and frank.
No, I think, and Graham, tell me if I'm mistaken, but our idea was to allow enough latitude for various vendor partners to offer TAPAS services in a way which are compliant with the minimum standards or the minimum policy for TAPAS. And I think we were seeing Deep Dive and ReadCube to talk to, and others being able to provide this.
Okay, so that could be a way forward. Graham, what would you like to add?
This is exactly, as Andy said, what we had in mind. We've already had discussions with Mendeley, ReadCube, and Deep Dive around about the sorts of implementation. So, yeah, this is what we were hoping for. Okay.
Well, that's a positive note. I still see a lot of silent people in the webinar. Is there anybody among you who would now think, yes, let's get this going, either with one of the three vendors that expressed interest or can offer the services, or in another way? Anybody who I can encourage to say something about that? Still a bit silent. Well, maybe you need a bit of time to ponder on it and to digest everything you heard today. From the side of STM, though, we're very curious to understand how STM members would like this project to be taken forward. To that purpose, we shall circulate a survey later this week, and we hope you can respond to it. We would like to know how eager you are to implement something like TAPAS or something exactly like TAPAS, whether you would want it developed further in some kind of a collaborative way between STM members, or whether you feel confident to turn to one of the service providers who can offer you something like this. So please know that we will be addressing you for this, and we hope to hear back from you. And for now, I would like to give people one last chance to raise a question, to make a comment before we close the webinar. I see no one, so I will take it that you're all happy with what you heard. I want to remind you that the webinar was recorded. We will send you a link to the recordings so that you can listen to it again in case you missed a few things, or forward that link to any of your colleagues to whom this might be relevant. And then, very last but not least, I would really like to thank you for joining the webinar, for your attention and time. And as I say, I also hope to see your response to our survey later this week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, F. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Graham. And thank you, Andy. And thanks, everybody who helped in the discussion.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Sam.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Christos, also. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.